Dobrý den. In this video, we're going to have a look at what happens to possessive pronouns in the accusative. How můj and moje changes into mého and moje. So you already know that nouns and things that goes with them change according to the gender. So when you have the nominative case or to je, this is my friend, moje kamarádka, and můj kamarád. So you see the my form changes according to the gender. And that same thing happens in the accusative. When you say I see somebody, or you see, vidíš kamarádku, kamaráda, so the noun changes, but the possessive pronoun changes with that. So you have vidíš moji kamarádku and vidíš mého kamaráda. So this is what happens to all the possessive pronouns. To see it in the big picture, we see that they all change in the cases. And this may look a bit scary and intimidating, but actually there are many things that make it a lot simpler. So for example, his, on, and its, ono, have all the same form all the way through, jeho. The same goes for their, which is jejich. It's all the genders and all the cases, the same form. Ona is a bit more complicated, that's her, but for the accusative case, it is mostly její. And we'll see that actually její is the most common form anyway. So when we look at the accusative, which is what we're interested in today, we see that things are much simpler than it may appear. So let's zoom in, and we see that for my and your, mé, můj, tvůj, we see some changes here, and then we see some changes for náš and váš, which is your, plural, and our, and we also see some change in one case with her. And but they're not all the way through. They're only happening in some cases, and in this case, we only see the change for masculine animate, the 10 nouns that are mostly people and animals, and then we see the changes in the feminine, which is again the only place where we see any change in the possessive pronouns. All the other ones are exactly the same. So it's even simpler because all of the changes follow a similar shape. They sort of share a shape. For the feminine, it is I. And we see for the masculine that it is eho. So for feminine, we see moje changes into moji, tvoje becomes tvoji, naše, naši, vaše, vaši. And for the masculine, we have můj becomes mého. We get rid of the uj, replace it with eho. Tvůj, tvého, náš. We add našeho, váš, vašeho. But again, it's fairly regular. You just notice that in náš and váš, the a and e get shortened into a and e. So náš becomes našeho, váš, vašeho. But that's a very small change that you can very quickly get used to. There are some alternative forms, particularly in the feminines of my and your. And so we have ma and dva, those are the different forms. They look very much like adjectives and they behave like adjectives in their forms, and they become mo and vo. But they're not very common, so you don't have to worry about them too much. And there is also the accusative form of její, her, which is jejího, which we already saw. Now, how important is all of this in the overall scheme of things? Well, when we look in the word at a glance tool in the corpus, we're going to see, for example, for můj, that můj, the basic form, is by far the most common, followed by moje, which is the feminine form of that. And when we look at the statistics, the actual numbers, we see that the only other form that is more than 10% of all uses is mého, and all the other ones are barely making the cut. For the same case is for váš and vaše. Here we see the feminine is actually slightly more frequent than the masculine, vaše over váš, but they're roughly the same. And then vaši, the other forms are much less common, and then vašeho, which is one of the ones that we saw in the accusative, hardly ever shows up. And then when we look at její, we saw that její was one of the exceptions in the third person. So jeho was different from její, but we see the other forms hardly ever show up. So we see její is by far almost 90% of all the uses, by far the most frequent, and jejího and jejím hardly ever make an appearance. And does all this apply to the accusative only? No, it applies to other cases. So actually, accusative is even less frequent. So the form mého is shared by accusative and genitive, and we see that actually it's only in the accusative when it's used, it's not nearly that frequent. So most of the time we see mého, it is in the genitive, and that would be where we'll need to focus our efforts. So as you can see, it is something that's part of the grammar. It's part of something you need to know about and learn, but it is not something that you will encounter all that often, and perhaps you won't need to use it as often. So thank you and good luck with Czech. Hodně štěstí s českou gramatikou a nashledanou.